On a day in the year 1989, a group of tourists was on a yacht trip, enjoying the sea breeze when, from a distance, they spotted a floating object on the water's surface. As they approached, they discovered it was the body of a woman. The police were notified, and after an investigation, they found 3 bodies of 3 women in the same area. The victims' legs were tied with a rope connected to a cement brick. The search for the criminal took a while, but in the end, the police would uncover the truth in a strange and distinctive way. Welcome to Back Channel. Before we delve into today's story, we must provide you with this disclaimer. This story discusses a crime and includes an element of assault on women. I won't go into detail on this aspect during the events, but let's mention some things you might need to know for the story to make sense. In the end, this is a true story, and not everyone likes to hear about such matters. It's better not to continue with the video. The story dates back to 1989, so it's a bit old. The events took place in the state of Florida, Easy State, almost like a water-surrounded peninsula that attracts many tourists year-round. Most of these tourists are in maritime areas, and one of these areas was the city of Tampa. A group of tourists was on a sea tour, and suddenly, as they were enjoying themselves from a distance, they saw a strange object floating on the water. As they approached, they were surprised to find a dead woman's body. They immediately contacted the Coast Guard. The body wasn't far from the shore, approximately 3 kilometers away. The Coast Guard arrived and retrieved the woman's body. They were astonished to find her mouth sealed and her hands tied with a yellow rope. Worse still, her legs were tied to a cement brick, indicating that she had been intentionally tied and thrown into the sea, drowning her. In such cases, the standard procedure is for the Coast Guard to search the area to look for any evidence related to the crime. During their search, they found 2 additional bodies, also women in the same manner, bound, masked, and with their legs tied to cement bricks. This crime had 3 victims. They first noticed that the 3 victims had their lower garments removed. They assumed that the assault had taken place before they were thrown into the sea. What was even worse is that the victims were water creatures, which means they were drowned while still alive. They were thrown into the sea after being executed, and their eyes were not covered, suggesting that the perpetrator enjoyed inflicting more pain and psychological torment on them. Now, how did their bodies float to the water's surface with the rope still tied to them? The answer is that after death, as the body decomposes, it releases internal gases that inflate the body like a balloon. Consequently, the body floats, and even the weight of the cement brick was insufficient to keep them underwater. However, when they were still alive, the weight of the brick was more than enough to drag them down. The second thing the police noticed was that the 3 victims resembled each other in features, leading them to conclude that they were likely relatives. Moreover, they were probably a mother and her daughters, as one of the victims was older. As for the second victims, they were teenage girls, and their bodies or belongings didn't carry anything indicating their identities. Now, the police's task was to identify them. They had no other option but to announce the incident in the media, of course without publishing their pictures or images of their bodies, as the bodies had started to decompose. However, they informed that 3 bodies of a mature woman and her 2 teenage daughters were found. They asked anyone with information to contact them. Some time passed until the police received a call from the manager of a hotel in the area, a hotel called Days Inn. The hotel manager informed the investigators that they had a guest, a woman with her 2 daughters who had taken a room, but they hadn't been seen for 3 days. When the cleaning staff entered their room, they found all their belongings left as if they had disappeared. The manager questioned why they hadn't contacted the guests. In 1989, mobile phones were not widespread and few people used them, and they were not even very functional. The phone network coverage wasn't good. Anyway, the police went to the hotel, and there they obtained the identities of the mother and her daughters. The mother's name was Joan Rogers, and her older daughter was named Michelle, aged 17, while the younger daughter was named Christy, aged 14. After learning their identities, they discovered that they originally came from another state, Ohio, which was more than 1,500 kilometers away from Florida. It was clear they were on vacation. The investigators wondered why they contacted the father, who was Joan's husband, named Hal Rogers. They obtained a family photo, an old one from years before the incident. Even the daughters were younger. Hal and his whole family managed a farm in Ohio, a dairy farm with chickens and cows. Managing the farm was a strenuous job that required constant work throughout the year without a break. There was no day to rest unless the work allowed it. Animals needed daily care, so when the mother and daughters wanted a break and a change of scenery, Hal couldn't leave the farm. Their financial situation didn't allow them to hire workers or people to help, so he couldn't leave the farm at all. Therefore, the mother and daughters went on the trip on their own. Hal's behavior was strange. He left them alone on the long journey, and they were supposed to return on June 1st, a date they had agreed upon. However, days passed, and there was no trace of them. This is where the strange part comes in. The father didn't attempt to contact the police as any other father or person would do. Imagine yourself in his place. If your family went on a trip or outing and set a specific return date, and if they didn't return on that date, you would start to worry. Most likely the next morning after the agreed date, you would go and report to the police. But Hal didn't care. 3 days passed without him making any move, and in the end, it was the police who had to inform him of what had happened. The investigators were puzzled by his reaction, especially after informing him of the news. His response was, "I don't have time to be emotional now. I have a farm to run." He went back to his work on the farm as if nothing had happened. Strange. This is the first time I've seen a father so cold. After your wife and young daughters were killed in such a brutal manner, let's assume there were problems between him and his wife. Or maybe he didn't love her. Let's assume something, but the daughters, your young daughters, one age 17 and the other 14, a criminal kidnapped them, did what he did to them, and killed them in this way, throwing them into the sea while they were alive and not resisting much. The investigators immediately suspected him. In family-related crimes, relatives are always the first people to be suspected. And even now, I'm sure many of you are thinking about who the killer might be. But after investigating him further, the investigators were convinced without a doubt that he had no hand in the crime and that he hadn't left the country in the past few days. First of all, the town they lived in was in Ohio, more than 1,500 kilometers away from Florida, where the crime occurred. So for Hal to go and come back, he needed at least 2 days. Moreover, the town where they lived was a small town with hundreds of residents, and everyone knew each other. Hale was seen every day, either in the restaurant, the supermarket, or other places around town. There were many witnesses who confirmed seeing him daily. So, it was impossible for him to be the killer. One wonders about his cold reaction. He showed no emotions and immediately went back to his work on the farm as if nothing had happened. Some psychological analysts say that this might have been his way of dealing with grief and pain, trying to drown himself in work and the daily routine he was accustomed to forget, as the shock was too overwhelming to comprehend. However, to this day, in some interviews, he appears calm and later seems unaffected, even smiling as he talks. Anyway, aside from the father, let's return to the crime. Forensic experts examined the bodies, trying to find any evidence, but unfortunately any trace that could have been present, such as fingerprints, hair, or DNA, was lost in the water. The bodies had been in the water for 3 days, and the elements had likely erased any potential evidence. The police were searching for the mother's car since they knew she had a car. After the search, they found her car near a small boat harbor on the coast. They concluded that the mother and her daughters likely boarded a boat from this harbor, probably owned by the criminal. This harbor was more of a small, general area. It wasn't officially termed a harbor, but rather a boat launch site. The police focused on the mother's car, parked in front of this small harbor. Here, I want you to pay attention. The police found crucial items in the car. They found 2 handwritten notes, each written in a different handwriting. The first note was a map or instructions with directions to the hotel where they were staying. As for the second note, it contained instructions to the location of this harbor where the car was parked. The investigators handed these notes to forensic specialists to analyze the handwriting. The note with instructions to the harbor's location was written in the mother's handwriting. The experts comparing it to samples of the mother's writings confirmed that it was indeed her handwriting. However, the second note, the one with the map and hotel directions, was written in distinct handwriting by an unknown person. The police focused intensely on these notes as they felt they might lead them to the killer. In any case, these notes were the only thread they had. Let's go back to the first note, the one written by the mother with directions to the harbor. The last two words on this note were written in blue and white, like blue and white. They are going. Where a boat launch location could be blue and white. Surely, the investigators immediately assumed it was the boat. Well, they began to gather a few pieces of information. Later, the police received a report from an individual who said that there was a man living in the area operating a business without a license. He was using this harbor or the place where boats set off. The business was taking tourists on sea tours at sunset. This man's name was Jason Wilcox, and he had a boat that was blue and white. After investigating him and his background, the police were surprised to find that he had a criminal record and even been to jail for physical assault. After checking his address, they discovered that he lived approximately 8 kilometers from the small harbor. The police went to his house, confronted him, and there, beside the boat, found cement blocks similar to those tied to the victims' bodies. Jason denied any involvement in the crime, and without tangible evidence against him, the police couldn't do much. They couldn't even ask him to provide a handwritten note for comparison with the unknown person's handwriting. However, the investigators remained vigilant and continued to follow him, and during these investigations, a new thread had emerged. Of course, the crime became widely known, and the victims' images were circulated in the media and even on large billboards in the streets, announcing a reward of $25,000 for information leading to solving the case. The police were receiving a large number of calls and reports daily, most of which were, of course, unhelpful and didn't lead to anything. Still, one person came forward with valuable information. This person was actually a Canadian girl who was also on vacation in Florida. This girl's name was Jody Blair, and her image wasn't circulated in the media. In reality, this Canadian girl had reported to the police an assault incident that happened to her on a boat just 2 weeks before the murder of Joan and her daughters. According to Jody, she was on vacation in Florida with one of her friends, and one day, as they were walking in the area, a man approached them and started talking to them. This man portrayed himself as kind and gentle, mentioning that he had a business taking tourists on boat tours during sunset. Jody's friend declined the offer and thanked him, but Jody was enticed by the idea of the boat, the sea, and the sunset, feeling that the view would be something unforgettable. Indeed, the scene of the sunset from a boat in the middle of the sea is a beautiful and unique experience. However, why would a girl from a foreign country go out alone on a boat in the middle of the sea with a stranger? I don't know. Some people tend to be overly trusting, and maybe at that time, before the internet era, not everyone was familiar with stories of criminals and crimes. In any case, Jody joined the boat trip with the stranger. When they were on the boat in the middle of the sea with no one around, the man pulled out a knife, placed it on her neck, and threatened her. He made it clear that if she didn't comply with his wishes, he would kill her. The assailant intended to assault her, warning her not to think about any crazy ideas and not to attempt to wait in the sea until morning, as the water was full of sharks. Jody pleaded and begged him to leave her alone. In the end, the vicious assault took place, and after it was over, she sat in a corner of the boat, covered her face, and the criminal waited until it got dark. Afterward, he maneuvered the boat back towards the shore. When they were close to the coast, He ordered her to get into the water and swim. Investigators say that most likely he did this to eliminate any evidence attached to her. Any traces like fingerprints or hair that could have been collected were washed away. After the girl swam back to the shore, she went straight to the police and reported the incident. However, when she went to the police, they couldn't do much for her as she had no information about the criminal. The only thing she knew was his appearance, and this sketch or drawing that the police made of the criminal became the only lead they had. A week later, the second crime occurred, the murder of Joan and her daughters, and in the media, it was reported that the boat was blue and white. Similar to the Canadian girl's case, the criminal in this case also had a blue and white boat. The Canadian girl came forward again and told the police that she was sure that the killer in this case was the same person who had assaulted her. The investigators were convinced that the criminal in both cases was the same person. Now, the Canadian girl became a key witness in the case, the only one who had seen the criminal's face. The first thing the investigators did was to show her a picture of Jason Wilcox, the person they were suspicious of. When she saw his picture, she immediately said, "No, Jason doesn't resemble the criminal who attacked me." Even when they compared his appearance to the police sketch, the features didn't match. In the end, the police brought Jason to the station and conducted a lie detector test, and he passed it. Additionally, he had an alibi from some people who testified that he was with them on the day of the crime. Consequently, Jason Wilcox was acquitted of the charges in both cases. The sketch of the criminal's face led to many calls from people who believed they had seen the criminal or knew him. Similarly, the issue of the blue and white boat generated numerous calls since many boats had that color scheme. The volume of reports reaching the police daily was overwhelming, and they later discovered that one of these reports was accurate. A neighbor of the criminal recognized him from the sketch, called the police, and informed them of his suspicious activities. However, I don't know what happened exactly. The police, it seems, either didn't act promptly or didn't thoroughly investigate, although they had the criminal right in front of them. Imagine that they received a valid report, but this report didn't lead to his arrest. Surely, the quantity of daily reports played a role in this oversight, and even though the criminal was within their reach, he remained free. Surprisingly, this situation continued for 3 years. 3 years, and the case was still unresolved by the year 1992. During this time, the case wasn't actively pursued as it was initially, and they weren't working on it with the same intensity. Nevertheless, reports were still coming in. One of the investigators working on the case had a peculiar and distinctive idea. Do you remember the note that was found in the mother's car, which was a map with handwritten instructions to the hotel in a distinctive handwriting? Do you recall this note? The police believed that the killer wrote this note, and since the handwriting was very distinctive, there was a possibility that someone could recognize it. What did the police do? They hung 5 large billboards in the streets. The writing on the billboards was the handwriting of the murderer, accompanied by information that the person who killed the Roger family would receive a reward of $25,000, and the police department's phone number was also displayed. This move was very unusual and distinctive, and I don't think anyone had used this approach before to solve a crime. It was a groundbreaking move to publish the handwriting of a criminal on billboards, and imagine that this strategy yielded results. The woman you see here is named Joan Stevie, and the strange coincidence is that her name is similar to the name of the murdered mother, and she is the one who will help solve the case. This woman was walking down the street one day and saw one of the billboards that the police had put up. The billboards had the criminal's handwriting on them, and as soon as she saw them, she recognized the handwriting because it was distinctive. She immediately called the police and told them that this handwriting resembled that of a contractor who had worked on her house, and she had invoices with his handwriting on them. So the investigators went to her and she explained that she had dealt with a contractor working in aluminum who had done several things in her house and provided her with invoices. She was sure that the handwriting on the invoices matched the handwriting on the billboard. After their experience with this man whose personality was strange, and always spoke in a suspicious manner as if he were lying all the time, and her experience with him was bad. The investigators took the invoices from her. They sent them to a forensic handwriting expert for analysis, and with just a quick glance, the expert recognized that the two handwritings matched perfectly. The letter T in the middle of many words, the letter designed shape, that was an exact match, and the various peculiar shapes of the letter E all confirmed that the person who wrote the invoice was the same person who wrote the hotel directions. So, the police went and arrested him, and if there were any doubts before, all doubts vanished when they placed the sketch next to a picture of his face. The images matched. The criminal's name was Oba Chandler. He was 43 years old at the time, married, and unbelievably, he had 8 children from 7 different women. He also had an aluminum contracting company dealing with aluminum work in houses, such as kitchens and doors. Furthermore, he had a criminal record dating back to his teenage years, including assaults on women and spending several years in prison. On top of all this, he owned a blue and white boat, providing a strong piece of evidence. One of the crucial pieces of evidence they obtained was the communication log. This log recorded radio calls made from any boat in the area to the coast. Because these calls passed through the Coast Guard or a communications center dedicated to boats at sea, the records confirmed that a boat was present at sea during the time the crime was committed, as the criminal apparently contacted his wife after finishing the crime to inform her that he had problems with the boat and would be delayed in returning. Of course, Chandler denied the charges and claimed he was innocent. However, after his arrest, the police brought the most important witness who could potentially identify him: the Canadian girl who had been assaulted on the boat. They showed her a series of pictures, including Chandler's, and placed them in a lineup for her to directly identify. Without hesitation, she pointed to his picture, expressing clear fear and disgust in her demeanor to reinforce her identification. After that, the investigators decided to search Chandler's boat, but they were surprised to find that it had disappeared just 3 months after the crime, likely to get rid of any potential evidence. The investigators wanted more evidence to strengthen their case in court. They examined the note, which was a map with handwritten instructions to the hotel, and after examination, they found several fingerprints. Most of these fingerprints were traced back to the victims, the mother and her daughters. However, there was a large handprint on the paper not referring to fingerprints but to the palm print. It seems that when he was writing on the paper, he held the paper with the palm of his hand, and as he began to write, his hand pressed onto the paper. So when they compared the palm print on the paper to Chandler's handprint, they found a perfect match, more concrete than the handwriting they were initially confident about. With this palm print evidence, they felt that they didn't need additional proof. Oba Chandler stood in court before the judge, the jury, and the prosecutor, presenting the evidence against him. Despite maintaining his innocence, the evidence was strong. He had attempted to divert attention by imprinting his hand on the paper, but it only further incriminated him. Chandler told a modified version of the true story, claiming he met the family at a gas station, and the mother asked for directions, leading to him writing the directions on the map. The investigators believed this part of the story, but they were certain he wasn't telling the whole truth. The true story, as gathered by the investigators, unfolded when Chandler lured the family onto his boat, promising a scenic sunset cruise. Once in the middle of the sea, far from the coast and anyone else, Chandler threatened them with a knife. With no other options in such an isolated location, the family complied as he tied them up with the distinctive yellow rope discussed earlier. After assaulting them, he tied concrete blocks to their legs and threw them into the sea, leaving them alive until the last moment when he drowned them. One of the witnesses during the trial was a fellow inmate who claimed that Chandler had confessed to assaulting a foreign woman on a boat. The inmate also mentioned that Chandler spoke of attacking 2 girls and their mother at sea, with one of the girls resisting. This testimony, along with other witness accounts, further strengthened the case. Chandler was sentenced to death, And after years of legal procedures, he was executed by lethal injection on November 15, 2015. Astonishingly, even after his execution, it was revealed that he was a serial killer. A cold case involving the murder of a 20-year-old woman in 1990, which remained unsolved for years, was finally linked to Chandler through advancements in forensic analysis. Despite his heinous crimes, justice prevailed and Oba Chandler faced the consequences of his actions. The story concludes with a reflection on the closure of the case and a reminder to subscribe to the channel for more intriguing videos.